evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That's me, Kyle Naranya. That is hopefully for somebody. Well, the people have spoken. I put out a poll as to what to review this week because of all of the strikes. Fortunately, the Writers Guild strike has come to an end. But currently, it doesn't look like any of the studios want to deal with the actors, which is unfortunate because last I checked, can't make anything without the actual actors. You can write a hell of a lot, but you cannot film anything. All right, then. So it was between two things that I was curious to watch, which was Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, which is officially the end of the 30-year continuity, or Castlevania Nocturne. The listeners said they wanted Castlevania Nocturne, so I can say next week I'm aiming to do Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, and if my schedule allows for it, there will also be a review of, I should look up what this is called, Killers of the Flower Moon. So fingers crossed that it's good. Who's to say I have not enjoyed the last couple of Martin Scorsese films? So fingers crossed it's good. My wife
My
did read
wife.
my wife. That is a voice. So I am joined by longtime friend Rein, who actually watched a show before me. So huzzah, pop the
Oh.
metaphorical champagne. The doctor is in. Okay. So we haven't, because of the length of the podcast, haven't necessarily had the chance to talk about it yet on the record. So the benefit of talking about Castlevania Nocturne is it gives me an opportunity and Rein to talk about Castlevania, the original series. So did you watch it all in binge all 4 seasons? Did you watch it periodically? How did you watch the original show?
Yeah, so I think God, I guess I would have been in medical school when like the first season dropped, whenever that was, like the oh God, we're 2023, so the late 2010s. Like
Yeah, first
right
season was 2017.
okay, yeah, so totally I was in med school, you're just trying to catch something quick on Netflix between trying to like sleep and eat and like get through your day to day. And I think basically what happened was like, I heard the grumblings like, oh, video game adaptation on Netflix, and it was right around the time that like Daredevil had all that hype is like, oh, Netflix can do like cool things. And so I watched the first season. I was like, oh, this is like very different. It doesn't like I've dabbled in the game, so I didn't really know what to expect, and it was like, okay, well, they're really like it was such an interesting directional choice with 4 episodes to try and introduce people into like the world, who the big bad guy is, and not even and really make you really sympathetic for like the disaster that happens in that first season. And such a great setup, and then so weirdly cut short as a season as well.
Yeah, four
Where you're kind
episodes.
Yeah, so it really like from the time that I watched it, I remember finishing the first season being like, great, where's the rest of it? Because you did such a good setup, and I was like, oh, it's probably just like a little cartoon teaser for like a soon to be released video game. But even if it is, that's really good. And I think it took them what 6 to 8 months for another season to pop out.
It
A
was
year.
just over a year.
Okay.
It was like, yeah, 14 months, July to
All right.
October of 2018,
Perfect. So
which is a
just enough time.
substantially quick turnaround for
That's
animation.
for animation, that's wild. So they must
Yeah.
have heard really soon that they can start off, or they had the plan out for it, and they're like, we can start the second they say yes. Which is great because after that, I know I totally fell off the Castlevania boat. Like all my TV, as Kyle described earlier, I fell off the boat, and I feel like I caught snippets like, oh, Castlevania, its next season is out, this is out, and then I feel like I would binge like a season at a time in the last 3 or 4 years, to the point where I think it was last year I actually finished the 4th season of that first series, and it's so wild how that show ends from where it begins, because you think like just the way the show is structured, and then for them to have the gall to come back with another season. I'm very happy to have another season. I love like I've always loved the way why they approach like the timeline of the world and that kind of stuff to make it make a lot of sense. So it's really like gratifying to go back to the show and be like, "Oh, cool. They've done something different with the show and the season all over again." I'm so excited. Um and yeah, so it's been weird for over like 4 or 5 years to like dabble in it and then finally come back and be like, "Yes, excellent." Into it.
Yeah, I had a different experience where I think I'm remembering this correctly, where it was I have to look at dates again because it's all jumbled in together. So it would have been, I think. Oh, so yes, I can remember. So it was during the end times, also known as the
Mm,
pandemic, where
yes.
I was symptomatic and waiting for a PCR results. And so I was isolating from my family. And I want to look up dates for this because I'm fairly certain I'm remembering this correctly because it all kind of blends together.
Oh yeah, God,
Um,
those times certainly do.
yeah, okay, March. And when did this end? So this was May. Yeah, no, no, I'm merging two things together. Anyways, um, so I was waiting for test results for my first. So what wound up being negative, which was nice, but it was about 48 hours of you got to kill time, and
Yeah,
so
gotta kill time.
I was up here in this podcast studio, aka my man cave, and the three seasons had come out, and I know friend of ours, Dan, who plays every video game and watches everything ever made, had said it's great. Why haven't you watched this yet? I'm like, okay, fine. Netflix has always been the streaming service that I've paid the least amount of attention to. And I say, having had to subscribe to watch very limited things on and off, it drives me nuts. But we'll get to Nocturne later. But I binged through season one and was same response I think most people had. It was like, okay, that was 4 episodes. Like, I'm really hoping we get more. And then
Mhm.
obviously being able to dive into two. And two for me is really where it hit its stride.
Yeah.
And something that it's unfortunate that it turns out he's a piece of garbage, allegedly. But Warren Ellis' writing really, the way that he develops characters and the world evolves and expands from season to season. I think most people would agree season three of Castlevania might be its worst, but in that all of the setup that you then get in season four, like as a
Yeah.
whole, it's so gratifying because similar to I think shows like potentially things like Euphoria, where characters are just beaten down for most of the experience and you just want them to be able to succeed. Castlevania is 1,000% that for Trevor Belmont, where like
Mm,
nothing really goes right for him. And Richard Armitage playing that character, it's so pitch perfect. And we talked about this before we started recording earlier that the casting alone for each and every character, there's so much character in the voice and how it matches.
yeah.
And the aesthetic of Castlevania is something I really appreciate, where I can't seem to disconnect myself from this, which is it's similar to me to Avatar and Legend of Korra are clearly inspired by all the like family friendly animes and
Mhm.
then made in America, where
Yeah.
Castlevania is so clearly aesthetically inspired by the hard, mature, edgy side of anime and just bringing that to an American product. And since I've never played these games, and the fact that I loved the first series and ultimately was cheering by the end of it because of all of the character development and spoilers for both of these shows. We're going to get into that with Nocturne more specifically, and time codes for that will be listed, so don't worry. But in Castlevania, it ends with Trevor Belmont fighting a building size death voiced by Malcolm McDowell,
Excellent.
which is
It's
just
so
brilliant. Like
yeah.
it's
Because
crazy.
after the second season, I think the biggest problem with the third season is the second season they like serve Dracula up on a silver platter for the viewer and they're like, "Yeah, we brought Dracula in the second season." and
Yep.
you're like, cool. Hey guys, that's kind of the
That's it.
whole game most of the time.
Yep.
And then uh and then to go to like the third season and you're like, A, you split up the group that you've now learned to enjoy, to love, and like get that really great rapport with, but you're also now looking at um how like, how do you up the stakes when your stakes were like the guy
Well,
and
it
you
does all the
dealt with it.
side story, right? You
Yeah.
get an entire group of vampires that ultimately don't really affect the story, right? Because the big MacGuffin is Dracula's castle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
get all the forge masters and stuff, and it's just like season three is the lore dump of the whole
Yeah.
show, right?
It's
And
like
then
let's develop the environment that like will set up our next crazy season, but we don't have the time in our third season to actually to flesh this all out. We need two seasons to do that.
no, the best part of season three is Saint Germain, played by Bill Nighy.
Oh,
Like that was
so great.
absolutely so good. That character is
Yeah.
amazing.
That
So
that
needless.
oh
Go ahead.
yeah, that final scene where they're in like the church with the monster and that scene is excellent. Really, like that's like peak Castlevania right there. But you have to go through an entire season of Castlevania to get there. And
What?
not like season 2 Castlevania. You have to get through like season 1 Castlevania.
Yeah. And so, needless to say, I think most people, well, critically acclaimed for the most part, were excited about Nocturne. I remember when they announced it, I was very hesitant because
Mhm.
I was clearly excited because I loved the original show. In my opinion, even though I did love Last of Us, I own that physically on 4K. It's just over here to my left. Unfortunately, there is not a complete box set of Castlevania because I would buy it, but it's available individually. But that's neither here nor there.
Mm.
Support physical media. Thanks, Best Buy. I don't know if you heard this, Rain. Best Buy is not selling physical media starting very in 2024. Anywho, so excited.
What are they going to fill their store with? I don't
It's you know what? If you go to one now, it's mostly like appliances and whatnot. Like it's more like the
Mm.
accessory and appliance store now. And I was excited for this. The trailers were really good. And it's really interesting. Something I did today was I spoilers ahead for Castlevania Nocturne was I watched the trailers to see now that I had context for everything,
Mm.
how good the trailers are.
Yeah.
And they are excellent. That's about what something I was really happy about. So big change. We've jumped forward like couple hundred years, I think 300 and something years to the French
Mhm.
Revolution. And first off the bat, super happy that this was 8 episodes because
Mhm.
you get one of the elements that I really appreciated that I want to get into is that because of the length of this, half an hour, about 30 minutes, and 8 episodes, so ballparks to about 4 hours in total. That while the setup I found quite slow, now my viewing experience for this was a little bit different, which was when it premiered a couple weeks ago. I was in the midst of concussion recovery, so that was difficult to watch. So I watched the first two, and it didn't grab me, and I was immediately nervous because we're two in. At this point in the original show, on board. We'd
Yeah.
already seen Lisa get burned at the stake and
Yeah.
Dracula
Yeah.
turn into a
Great
giant.
setup.
Oh, it was and the
Honestly, one
having
of the best setups ever.
it's so good. And one of the elements that I really like in in this world is how invested the church is in the story. And we're gonna get to that with Nocturne, but specifically having them be an antagonist, and let's face it, there's a substantial amount of the population that would probably feel that way as well. But in giving it 8 episodes, the slow burn to kind of lay the groundwork for everything, by the end of episode 3, I was immediately decided that I was plowing through the show. So we get Richter Belmont, who is,
Mm.
I'm so happy he was not just another Trevor.
Yeah.
He's somebody who's been raised properly to be a
Yeah.
vampire hunter, right? We meet his mom, who I have the names here because otherwise I know I would forget.
Oh god,
He
yeah.
is Julia's son. Julie is his mother, and getting to see automatically what's different about be not more modern, but a closer to present timeline. And
Mhm.
I am so excited that we are likely going to have either. Actually, so I'm not sure about this, but I'd be very disappointed specifically. We get multiple villains, which is something Castlevania did not do till about season 3, as we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
right? Because it was all Dracula focused for 2
Yeah,
seasons
it was all about, even if there were other people under Dracula, it was still like, well, this is because of Dracula.
of Dracula, right? And so getting introduced to all the names are so difficult, but
Yeah.
Rocks, who immediately everything he does as a vampire, I'm like, man, they do insane things.
Ah, man.
It's so cool. He turns into a
He's
dragon. He's smoke.
he I so Leah was like watching the show with me. For those that don't know, Leah's my partner. She was watching the show. She was reading her book, but like looking over it every now and then to be like, I'm not really paying attention, but I'm paying attention a little bit. And she's just like, why can that vampire turn into smoke and turn into this dragon thing? And why can I'm like, honestly, I have no idea what the rules are anymore. This guy is breaking every rule, and
There
I'm
are
kind
none
of
with vampires. That's the thing I
and
kind of love about it. It's like they can do pretty much anything
yeah.
except Forge Master. Like,
Yeah,
that's
except
it.
that's the only rule, and I remember just, like, and the whole time he's in the show, there's never a clear, like, he's might be one of my favorite, like, evil people. I can't even technically call him a villain, because as you, like, go through the show, you're like, "You're getting more and more interesting every episode that you're in. How weird. I know less and less every episode, and yet you're giving me more, so."
Well, and the exploration of character is something that you tip one of the elements that I'm really appreciating in the streaming era is that you get this adult oriented animation programming, and by no means, like, it has all the spectacle, it has all the gore, which I can appreciate in animation form. I don't find it as off-putting when it's in a live action film, but that by no means limits the depth to each character. And
Mhm.
as this show goes on, specifically with Orlrox, with Richter, with Maria, specifically Tara, and even the
Yeah.
Bishop, everyone has such substantial trauma. And we
Yeah.
get to see each and every one of the characters struggle with this trauma, and we get to see post-traumatic stress with Richter, and again we're in spoilers, who witnessed the death of his mother, which resulted in his disconnection from magic, and what that
Mhm.
means for somebody who clearly magic was around. And following, he's the protagonist, he's the Belmont, of course, and how each character's relationship has affected their trauma response. It's mind blowing. Again, this is a video game adaptation that if you just had cool guys with deep voices killing vampires, no one would complain.
No, everyone would have been more than happy.
It would have been,
That's what the first series was about.
yeah.
I'm a deep brooding guy who kills monsters.
Yeah, and you killed my wife, so you get a year and I'm going to come kill you all. But
Mm,
the
mm,
fact that you have automatic from episode 1, and I'm so glad I decided to rewatch 1 and 2 before getting into the rest of the series, but you immediately have this traumatic event that I would argue is Richter's true origin story,
mhm.
right? And resulting him in going off to France. And one thing I found slightly humorous was, contextually, I know everybody in America at this point probably still had British accents, but because we know he's in Boston, I
Yeah.
kind of wish he had a Bostonian
No.
accent. It
No.
would have been so good. I kill vampires. Like it would,
Yeah. My mom was killed by a vampire.
yeah. Vampire, yeah.
Oh, God, it'd be awful.
It would have been awful, but
I'm
still.
just imagining the TV show that we were blissfully like saved from.
Yes. And right, and how each of the vampires relationships with each of the characters evolves as the show goes on. The main crux of this is that there is a revolution happening in France, the actual French Revolution that was happening around the same time as the independence revolution from the United States, and how in this context for the show's history, that the bureaucrats in charge of France were also infested with vampires. And so they're going one on one with the people trying to fight the supernatural problem while also having an actual revolution
Yeah.
from a political standpoint. And how, of course, that fits in with all of these vampires in like bouffants and white wig. Like it's the
Ugh.
visual aesthetic. It's perfect.
It's the setting is like there is a certain magic to like the thought process that must go on behind the setting and all this stuff. Like it's to think like cool, so we need to place our next our show in a new setting with a new time for people. And then on top of that, we're going to need to like make it make sense for, after everything's that's happened. So sure, it should be a couple hundred years later. And you look at like the board of like what's available. You're like, well, French Revolution is there. Wouldn't the vampires at this point kind of be mingled in and like share power with the wealthy and the elite? And you sit there and like the layering behind like the vampires aren't doing it because they like it. The vampires are doing it because that's how they've like survived and established themselves. And most of them hate it. And like that was the part that really made it stand out to me was like the honest vampires like, yeah, this sucks. I hate mingling with humans. I hate having to like back up the bureaucrat so I can live comfortably and feed on peasants. Like this sucks. I want to be in charge again.
Yeah, and the relationship that as a result the elite vampire leadership has to have with the what the heck is his first name? Where is Bishop?
Mm,
With Emmanuel, the
good
abbot,
night. Yeah.
who's who's so twisted in his regard, which is that, so again, we're in full spoilers, that he is Maria's father, and but at the same time he is a man of the cloth and sees a stop to the revolution in making an armistice with vampires as he is their forge master, and just the twisted nature and like, I think what I'm doing is good, and that's his justification because it's for the greater good.
Yeah.
And how you get these such found like Old Testament references with the sacrifice of Isaac to Abraham
Oh,
and the
just
vampire Messiah coming forward. I have to say, I think that may be one of the aspects that doesn't work for me is that we do meet the Messiah, I think, too late in the season. We spend a lot of
yeah.
time with her like general, who's kind of like, she's kind of like Okoye from Black Panther if she was
Mm,
insane and a vampire, of course.
mm.
And that character's great. And getting to see that, I'm obviously, we're in full spoilers, so I'm sure we will get more of Sekhmet in season 2 because similar to season 1 of the first season, they are unsuccessful. Ultimately, season 1 of Castlevania was about getting to Alucard, and we'll get there. But this being a failure and the fact that Tara sacrifices herself, she is the lamb.
Mm.
And while I would say that's probably over the top in how they get to that point in saving Maria from being sacrificed to Sekhmet, which is an Egyptian god, is really interesting. One of the elements, while I think it is executed well, that I would like to get your opinion on is, we know that obviously Richter gets cut off from magic when he witnesses his mom die to Orlocks, and
Mhm.
that Maria is using some form of witchcraft. And one of the elements I really appreciated is that it's so visually different from anything we saw Sylphia do in the first season as a
Yeah.
speaker, right? Like she has this
Yeah.
animal summoning portals, and when she used the one portal to like uppercut a turtle into the chin of the,
So weird.
it was so like the action design in this and the way that everything is choreographed is so, it's so captivating because at times it can be incoherent, but you never lose track of where everybody is.
Yeah.
And even at times it turns into just stop motion paintings at
Yeah,
which
it's
were
and then
crazy.
sometimes it's like wild like blocking shots in order to like eliminate one fight and gradually lead you back over into another fight that's occurring simultaneously. And I wanted to bring up the church. I wanted to talk about the church briefly because another funny thing happened when Leah was watching and she looks up and she's like, that Bishop guy sucks. He's probably gonna betray them. I'm like, now, based on my experience in the first 4 seasons, sure, the church always sucks, but moralistically, they are also against the vampires, so therefore, he's very likely, he's like probably a good guy, and he just sucks naturally. So to find out that he was the Forge Master, which just like Leah sitting, just like, oh, I told you, he sucks, and I'm just like, oh my god.
Yeah, he did suck. He did suck. But speaking of forge masking, we might as well get into it now. I was shocked with how they decided, no, we're going to dive into what it means to be a night creature. That was an
Yeah,
element I was not expecting. We get the death,
very interesting.
right? We meet like Edward and
Mhm.
their names are all moved
Also,
around here.
who is the voice actor for Edward? Because was he voice acting and operatic singing? Because
Uh
give that guy an Emmy is all I'm saying.
just for
Because
singing. Yeah, it
just for
is
singing,
Sidney
just for the
James Harcourt, and yes, he is. So he was in
oh
Hamilton and I'm Not Gay, a musical. So yes, he's a off Broadway actor. So yes, clearly can sing.
oh
Um,
my
but
god, just so
well, and the character dynamics we get from Edward, and their names are all moved around here, and I don't like the organization of this. Um, the form, the she can earthbend. Where the heck is her name?
oh, her name isn't Tara.
No, Tara is the Annette. Annette.
Annette,
Right, and
Annette.
we're introduced to them so quickly, and that was I remember the first time I watched it, like, okay, you've already introduced me to way too many characters for this,
Yeah,
but the fact that you have their relationship where they're two Black Americans and how what their experience has been in the United States,
yes.
and
Or
obviously
even well, they're
go ahead.
from the Caribbean, right? So like
Yeah.
they're part of like where slavery in at least the North American Caribbean ways like was the worst for
Mhm.
America's sake.
Yeah, and getting to see one of the elements that I commend both these shows on is the level of, and again, this is coming from two cisgender heterosexual males, but
Absolutely.
in the representation has always been a part of both of these shows, and it's just a matter of fact in all like we didn't talk about it, but Orlok's, if anything, is um bisexual.
Yeah.
Now he does not talk about that specifically, so at minimum he's homosexual, he's gay,
hmm
because of his relationships, and we know about a past lover, but I don't remember specifically if it says what the gender was of his past
He's
lover.
he said
Does,
he.
does he say he? Okay,
He
and
says
his
he and he was very clearly Native American,
yeah, and his
which I thought was
relationship,
also really interesting.
yeah, and
Such an interesting villain. Man, every time I think about that guy, I'm like, that's a villain that should be in every TV show.
he's so good. And well, and that
So
actor, I don't know if you looked it up. He was in Reservation Dogs, which is incredible. It's on
oh.
Disney Plus, and he was also in Hawkeye and will be in Echo when that comes out. He was
Oh, very cool.
the uncle of Echo. So, been getting his work. And
Good for
I
him.
think brings a lot of authenticity to that character specifically. And again,
Yeah.
the amount of perspectives we get in this show with Tara being a refugee from Russia and what she's
Mm.
experienced, and she has had an initial relationship with losing her sister to Ezebet Sekme. There's a lot of hard
Sekhmet
names.
or whatever.
Yeah, the
Eh,
Egyptian god, and so
yeah, yeah.
building to that as the ultimate big bad villain is really interesting, specifically with like what it pushes through the abbot, where it's like, dude, you're supposed to believe in one God. And like this chick's just straight up saying she is one. And
Yeah.
just the dichotomy of everything he's doing, clearly at the end of it comes from him just wanting to save the two people he actually loves, which I find really
Mm.
interesting. And speaking of familial connections, like Richter's mom dying and that being the trauma that he's dealing with, well, I'm glad he got over the death of his mom in this season. And this is not to take away from the scene where he goes Super Saiyan, because it is
Mhm. Mhm.
incredible. And I have had
Mhm.
that piece of the score by Trevor Morris and Trey Toy on my
Mhm.
phone pretty much on repeat all day. it's a phenomenal sequence, and I believe Trevor Morris also composed the score for Castlevania. I love where it comes from, but I'm hoping that that does not mean that that specific relationship he has is put to bed. Specifically because he does try to ultimately kill Orlox and isn't successful because Orlox just likes toying with him for some reason and meeting his grandfather, which I love how that's not even a part of what ultimately
No.
reignites his connection to magic. And Ian Glenn, so Jorah of Mormont for you Game of Thrones fans, or Bruce Wayne from Titans for you
Mhm.
Titan fans, is such a great I don't give an F grandfather to this guy. It's and I love how his look, his aesthetic, in my mind at least, is like old Oliver Queen from like the Dark Knight Returns era.
Yeah. You know what?
Like
Yeah, he does have that look and
if he had
the
one arm, it would have been the same person. But he's like, I'm done with this, man. Like he has lost everything. And I think that being a mirror for Richter Belmont's character and just with some simplicity, a connection to kind of where Trevor was when we met him at the
yes.
beginning of Castlevania. Like
Yeah.
everything that mattered in the original gets at least mirrored or not, or if not mirrored, there is symmetry to that in this
Yeah.
show.
It gets like re-examined in the show, a
Yeah.
chance for everyone to like reflect on it.
Yeah, and the investment in having seen the previous. I think you could still watch this not having seen the original series. I wouldn't
Yeah.
recommend it, but I
No.
think watching that certainly made it a more gratifying experience. And so this was one thing you did tell me because when you did finish this for me, you're like, there has to be a season two. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like it'll be interesting to see where it ends. Like when they were trying to
Mhm.
push the Forge Master's machine back into hell, I thought, okay, well, if there's still an army of night creatures,
Yeah.
and again, exploring the humanity in that and them almost reigniting their souls was really interesting. And I'm certainly
Yeah.
hoping that doesn't get dropped because there's a ton of that to be explored later on with Edard and the other guy who Maria knew, who was he's one of the people at the very first revolution meeting,
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
that reflection, the reflection in that episode where they talk about like at right at the end when things like when they have like the night creatures that talk, and that was something that was always skipped over in the last series, right? Like it was like they're just night creatures. No part of what they were before they were night creatures is there. It's not up for discussion. But to actually have like an interesting, developed kind of like side aspect to it is so great. It adds so much potential to where another season could take you and what's out there for another season. It's just it's a magnifique. It cannot be beaten.
well,
It is
and
excellent.
specifically with the relationship that Emmanuel the Abbot has made with Sekhmet and like him being their Forge Master, you need me. What does that
Yeah,
mean for this army he's supposed to be supplying if you have somebody on the inside who might be systematically reigniting the consciousness within what were you were right they were essentially just feral animals, right? They were just
yeah.
minions for the other Forge Masters we'd seen before. And I'm curious if we'll get to see more of that with Emmanuel because we have seen Forge Masters in the past turn their armies on who are supposed to be their caregivers. And then ultimately, I think we can get to the conclusion, which is things go all awry. And I don't know,
God.
so Orlox's lover within the church in this season is in my brain, I just wanted to keep calling him the French sheriff of Nottingham. I don't know if you felt similar about that guy, but that's
I
how.
I think that's a really great way of describing him because I was just like, yeah, the French religious guy. Yeah, that guy. He was a background character for 4 episodes for like 3 episodes. Then he was sleeping with like my favorite villain. So I was like, I guess he's a guy. And then all of a sudden, like the episode before last, oh, now he's a character I see. Now I'm gonna have to untangle this web. Great.
Well, and he's part of the
He's
crew now, right? Like that's the thing.
yeah, but he was the only person that I like by the time we finished the show. I'm like, yeah, we did not maybe cover enough of you. Like we
Yeah.
got a little bit of everybody, but like to kind of flip it on its head, like, then they tried. Not saying the show did a bad job. He's the only character I just feel like we didn't get, like, a solid flashback or a vital piece of, like, the moolah, that the glue that holds it all together. It just wasn't there.
Well, he's the simplest, right? He's a character who believes in the abbot and believes him to be this honorable man of the cloth, and
Mhm,
then
mhm.
realizing this guy is not who I've signed up for, right? Like he's
Yeah.
he's fathered a daughter. Okay, like that for I find it comical that that's the straw.
That's
Like,
that's the thing
yeah,
that breaks
he's
him.
summoning night creatures and literally selling souls to hell and creating
Yeah.
these demons on earth. But it's for the
Yeah,
good of
that's
the church. But he
yeah,
had a
that's so
daughter,
yeah, oh, no, 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 no,
which is
no.
yeah,
Boy,
it's such
boy.
it's the hypocriticism is quite funny. But given the team we have at the end of this, where Tara is now a vampire, right? She sacrificed
Mm.
herself. We talked about that earlier, and
Ugh.
Maria and Annette and Richter just essentially fleeing for their lives because of the eclipse and being saved by Alucard. It was perfect. Like as soon as the
So
sword
much.
showed up, I'm like, it has to be Alucard. Who else would this
There's
be?
there's no one else.
No, it's a great ending that kind of adds to things are like it's almost like revitalizing. Like they've eaten their kind energy bar, not a sponsor,
Yeah.
and like they're ready for round two,
Yeah, they're all
which will
set.
be really interesting. I'm very curious because we didn't really have any Belmont mentors in the previous season. I
Mm,
feel like Juice or Just by Ian Glenn, like Grandpappy Belmont, he's too
mhm.
good a character not to use again. So I'm hoping he shows up maybe just at the end, like Han Solo
Mm.
style, because there are items of the Belmonts we have not seen again, right? Like the
Yeah.
whip we see, and we get to see Richter put on his headband, and that moment is awesome and metal. But we haven't seen Richter Trevor's sword, that dagger that was the kill
The
death,
death. I think
right?
I think at the end of the season I think at the end of that season um of Castlevania, like, he drops the flail, he drops the mace or, the chain whip. He drops it, and I think that's kind of a symbol, just like, yep, that's gone. It's just not gonna exist anymore. Like, it's so it hurts me to say that I feel like we're just not gonna see things.
Well, there may be, but at the same
Oh,
time, if we know the Belmonts have continued their mission against vampires and the
yeah,
supernatural, I would not be surprised if Alucard is there. Because we know in the previous show, again, couple hundred years ago, that
yeah,
they turned Dracula's castle into this sanctum for and with the library, the Belmont
yeah,
Library. There are certainly going to need to do, pun intended, I guess, like supernatural. Like we've got to go to the Men of Letters, or we
yeah.
need like
We gotta go back to the Belmont estate.
we need a lore
Oh, so
dump,
you
right?
so you think there'll be, like, a half a season of them following Alucard back to, like, probably what's the ruins of Dracula's castle and, like,
Exactly.
the
That's my
old
guess.
Belmont
Yeah.
estate. Mm,
Right, because like, okay, yes, you need to like, I guess we can get this is like wrap it up with speculation for two.
yeah,
So we know they've got to get rid of the Forge Master's machine, which typically was
mhm.
like a hammer and stuff. This is a full like Iron
Yeah.
Maiden. It was cool as hell.
Yeah, there were
Run it
yeah, we'll talk we can talk more about that because I have questions.
right, and then
Yeah.
even because she's something is up with Sekhmet. Clearly, she's doing something like next level to actually be.
Yeah.
If it's not the moon, she's putting something in the way of the sun. But
Yeah,
the whip typically, even when enhanced with magic from Richter, was doing nothing. So there needs to be something. There's going to be, I believe, some sort of MacGuffin. Whether it's, hey, we need to, kind of like John Wick 2, like they need to sort of fight their way out of France and get to
yeah.
wherever. I should look up what this place is. Where was the place? Because the Castlevania was in. It was like started with a W. Where was it? It was in Wallachia,
Oh,
right?
Wallachia.
Right, which is like, I'm guessing like Romania. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess they would go. east,
They'd go east. They'd go
right?
east.
Yeah, so they've got I wouldn't be surprised if it's kind of like licking our wounds, kind of try surviving a journey to where like to the stronghold. That would
Yeah.
be my guess, maybe for the first half, and then like, all right, let's arm up. Maybe we meet some other people along the way that we've seen before. I like I don't know.
Yeah, maybe there's descendants of the people that like originally settled at that location, and then
Mhm.
like Alucard's like, I've been living as a ghost among the peasants for like 200 years
Just killing
happily.
vampires, like, I was
Yeah.
the unknown, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting, like, we one thing that they touch on really briefly is that I guess the forge is constructed through Lycian, which is I know the Inukian? They use
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
right, which is the language of hell. How does an abbot read that? Like, I'm sorry,
So,
he
so,
Latin,
so,
okay.
so at one point, somebody mentioned something like, "Oh, you had to like give something to a devil in a demon in order to get what you needed to create demons or something like that." There was some line like that. And I
Yeah.
remember like sitting there being like, I should have subtitles on. I really could have used that information. And this is where again Leah and I have very differing opinions. I hate subtitles. I hate
I
them.
can't stand them unless I really need to know, like, if there's a turn of phrase that matters.
Yeah.
So typically
That I
not.
that I get, but even still like ooh, subtitles.
Yeah,
Ooh.
I'm not
But
sure.
yeah,
Well,
so it kind of sounds like he built the machine through the context of like hell gave him the blueprints for the machine,
yeah,
but
in
how did
the Necronomicon or whatever book we see.
yeah,
Oh,
and then the question is like, so how did you get your hands
on the book.
on the quote unquote tools in the book needed to like run that machine? And that's where like all my questions come from, and everyone was just kind of like, yeah, you can't just destroy it, it has to go back to hell. It's just like, well, who's the book says that,
Yeah.
and you're the only one that can read the book, and now you're gone. Uh-oh, it
Yeah,
feels
it's
like this is a
true.
bad situation.
When like specifically Maria has gained a father, lost her mother. Like
Hmm.
the trauma bucket's just getting fuller and fuller. I think
Yes.
just kind of wrapping things up. I'm curious what you think about this. I think season 2, similar to the original, will be we'll wrap up Sekhmet, and that because we know or all rocks is going back to America.
Yeah.
I think seasons 3 and 4, or at least season 3, fingers crossed, is about Richter going back to America to kill Orrox. That's my guess.
Ooh, interesting.
And then
I'm
maybe they
in.
kill God in season 4. Who
Yeah, they
knows?
just, God just gets taken out.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a very good guess. I don't think it's without its merits. It's a good
Well, we will
guess.
see. Season 2 fortunately has been announced, so fingers crossed we get it in like a year, because clearly those were some animatics. It wasn't just like, oh, surprise that this was successful. Unlike Masters of the Universe Revelation, which if you haven't checked it out, I recommend it because that was a franchise I did not care at all about, and
Mm.
it was dope. And I can't wait for Revolution. Rain, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it was disorganized as heck, but so much to talk about in that show. Like
Yeah.
it's absolutely worth the watch, especially if you've seen the previous, you'll obviously watch it, but even starting from the first season, like I was trying to explain again to Leah, like, oh, the first season has like the first 4 episodes are like this weird setup, and all of a sudden you're like highly invested in like a strange adventure to kill Dracula, and then it just like diving down that rabbit hole is so much fun again and again and again.
I wish I had a lull in my viewing schedule because then I could rewatch Castlevania, but I don't have one.
I can't
Um,
believe I mean, I'm happy to. I was glad I was able to knock out Nocturne because it is so short and it's so digestible. But god damn, like it's just gonna be so hard for me to watch. We finished like completely off tangent, but we just finished Russian Doll the first season last night, and we were really into it. And then it got a little creepy at the end, and we stopped. And Leah's like, "I'm done. We're done. Shut it down. Shut it
Funny.
down."
That's funny. Well, so that's not a recommendation for Russian Doll. Uh,
It is recommendation from me. I loved it.
all right, there you go. The doctor's approval. So yeah, as I said at the beginning of the episode, next week will be of Power Rangers Cosmic Fury. Another 10 episodes, half an hour long. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they wrap up 30 years of canon. I can say I have pre-ordered my Master Morpher, so if you know, you know. And other than that, you can follow me on the socials at Kyle_Naranya on Twitter is the only public one, and I guess Threads. My Instagram is private. But you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Hive, Threads, Facebook, YouTube. As usual, I am putting questions at the end of all of my Spotify episodes. So if you listen to on Spotify, there's always a question embedded there in for you. It might be, who is your favorite version of Dracula this week? I think that's what I'm going to put in this week's episode. So you can look forward to all the fun shenanigans. I have no idea what I'm going to do for promotional material for this episode, so make sure you're following. I just posted a TikTok where I was debating the superpowers in Paw Patrol. So you can check that out. And if you want the extended version of that, you can, of course, listen to the audio podcast on all podcast platforms. This has been Kyle Naranya, the film realist, joined by special friend Rein. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you next week. Bye!